Hello, today we're gonna focus on development of a game and review what I have done this month and also just continue with game development. Let's jump in with the updates. First of all, I added controller support, which was one of the biggest overhaul of all the scripts, and I know the last biggest thing after saving system and controller support is probably sound effects. Also added a tutorial robot, which is basically to give a bit of info about controls or quests that are not directly quests. I also, as you saw, have a block originally that was just a block to control as a text, like this is not what you should be doing, but I made a physical block, this rock, which basically you need to do something for it to walk away. So I basically was working on different kinds of blocks through this month. And one more that I made was a too dark to proceed block that you just saw a glimpse of. So another thing that I did is I played some I believe Link's Awakening, the old Zelda Game Boy game, and there was a Richard's house, I believe, where it was a lot of frogs, and I was like, I want to have frogs in my game. So I made a new mechanic where you can catch a frog. So this was completely unnecessary, but also involved coding, so this was an update to make some free running frogs. Basically, the concept was that we carry a loot and we split up the loot, so you take a loot as you catch a frog. I feel like I could definitely update this. There was even an animation, but it wasn't playing correctly, so this is what we have so far. The next thing was actually I made a water reflection. Once again, playing some old classic games, I thought it would be nice to have some kind of water interaction. I still feel like I would like to make some kind of splash walking into certain water, but currently I just made a water reflection through script. I saw some tutorials that you can also make it through particle system, but particle systems are just so confusing to me. As additionally to this update, I also played with some of those, and currently Casting a Rain has a little bit of particles in it. I'm not happy fully about it, and I'm probably gonna show it when it's better developed. Also made a boat in this scene. Originally the scene only had like a house and a lady, and it was no other, interiors, no other people, so now we have tutorial robot as well as the boat. I really like the swaying animation. It was purely animation, no script involved in this. So I made the interior of the boat, which I feel like there's some improvement into the art because I'm using light objects. Also the plant is based on my little plant, parlor palm that I have in the studio, which is just getting thinner and thinner every day. Yeah, I made some puzzle, but I feel like obviously that needs an update because it's really not have anything to guide the puzzle. But this is what we have. One of the biggest things was skill tree, because each skill was almost like a separate code, letting new playing systems, for example, invisibility is completely different from regeneration skill, or completely different from auto kill of non-boss character. So they all have very different dynamics, and each of them requires separate coding, so that took quite a big chunk of my time in testing. Which basically finishes February, January updates and brings me back to editing current progress. I was making a new scene, which basically was a farm scene, and I was also trying to draw it all into the Procreate. I saw a lot of people drawing entire background in one page, while I'm usually just doing separate assets and tile maps. But I haven't found my workflow yet, and to be honest, nothing works well, and a lot of times I end up redrawing a lot of assets and a lot of I don't have any consistency in my trees, which I find a big problem because I haven't found exact way how I would like to draw them yet. So it wasn't necessarily any better, however it let me finish entire scene background with the grind on that scene. In any way, this just feels like a lot of grinding, and I guess it does look a bit more interesting terrain. So I think as a base layer, it's a possibility to do it in a one layer. But I also tend to overmerge my layers, and then I struggled cutting them separately in Unity, like making outlines and cutting them in Unity, which was also a terrible experience. And what I found easier, however, is opacity. So changing opacity in your paint. The paint selection is a bit different, so I found that was easier. I used a lot of non-pixel brushes and then went over with pixel brushes on top of it. It's just, I always choose the hardest way, not the quickest way to draw something. So yeah, it's definitely a comparison and a possibility. I think in terms of me able to make more mountainy areas, because tiles make them very squarish, that was the benefit of it, and able to see as well as on the preview how it would look with the character in it. That was also very handy. So in some ways I did enjoy this process, but I still find tile maps somehow giving more control if you want to make any changes later. Anyway, I added some chickens and some a dog that I've drawn in Peachtober during Peachtober time. I think I was very strict on myself in Peachtober because I wanted to produce one asset every day, as well as like code it and put it and make it move and animate it. So I was making it minimal colors in a very neurodiverse way, where I literally wouldn't add any shading. So it would be literally like free color chicken. So I decided to actually update those assets because they were very clunky, and actually put some use to it, because honestly, which game does not have a chicken in it? So this is my basically work on the day, trying to upgrade animations, and there might be a couple of tricks if you're just literally starting, that took me time to realize. I am also just starting. I'm just still in the first year, in the second half of the first year at this point, and I'm still way below from what normally people able to implement in their games. So this is the original chicken, and I wanted to play you the animation of the original chicken before I change it, but I guess I didn't play it, but here we go. And I decided to make 2 layers of this chicken. So I decided to make a white and a brown chicken, because I don't think there's enough of brown chickens in the games. So I did redraw pixel art assets for those. So my typical workflow is to make idle, walk left and walk right states. And I had to do 2 controllers, 1 brown chicken, 1 white chicken, and then make those states and put those animations, right? So I'll show you my sprite sheet, and my current sprite sheet is basically wasn't divided well into sprites, because I wanted to do both chickens next to each other, which makes more problems cutting them up. Usually what I do, if I did not make them compatible to automatic slicing, then I try to make sure that each of them is exactly the same size, and that the pivot point is set in the center. And yeah, it's quite tricky. If you notice, my biggest regret was I left a stray pixel on the brown chicken, and it's really bothering me because I don't want to go back and edit the entire image again and redraw it. to be able to use it. So I actually just made animations vivid, and I thought, well, if it really bothers me, then I'll redo it later. But what a shame. As you notice as well, what I can say that I usually put both sprites that are flipped, and I do walk left and right separately. A lot of people actually use either flipping in the script, or you can also just set the transform in the animator, but I'm always doing everything hard way. So I actually do it physically a lot of times. And then there's a lot of grind trying to put them all into the animator. So this is what I'm gonna be doing. So the idle animation is, it pecking the ground. So that was my goal, because sometimes you can make a patrol function with what I like to use is spline follower. So I usually make a spline. If you see there is a spline under, I usually make a spline where I want them to go. Again, this is all seeps down to control. And you can also make a script to pick up spots to stop and do idle animation instead. A lot of times it's not very smooth, so it will still idle where it doesn't need to. So pecking the ground sounded very useful, because you can just walk and peck. Also, as always, when I'm trying to set animation, it's like determining what speed is natural looking speed, how much the space between the frames. A lot of frames actually work for me like at least 15 or 20 seconds apart, and that would be relatively fast. Then obviously you might want to space it even more. So I think this is about the rhythm. I wanted it to look like it's pecking closer together. So here we are. I think that was the most natural. I didn't quite like how much it bends, the tail bends really, but I felt like it was much better than my previous chicken. So it was just like significant improvement from the previous one, and we have to be happy with some kind of result. And same was for walking animation, and same was for repeating the brown chicken, because I made exactly same frames, let's say, for both colors. Again, if you wanted purely to recolor, I think you can either do it through the particle system or just adjust the color itself. Though on the white chicken it would be quite easy probably to just put the base color as darker. But and I did implement the strategy on like aquarium and fish, where you can just recolor the fish and make like a randomizer of different colors, so make it easier to make bigger bulks. But in my brown chicken design, I made a different type where you have a lot of this I don't know how to call it, but like caruncles that they have, as well as around the eyes, not just hanging and so on. So I really wanted to implement that as a different kind, even though the shapes of what we do are very similar. Next part, you'll see me actually working on the splines. So I'll try to play it, and this is the spline we currently follow, which was original, and the chickens were actually following, but I dragged them from a different scene, and this all kind of desynced. But if you look, like, even if I not sync them, it would be kind of natural. The chickens are just playing around, right? It doesn't necessarily need to be a close follow, but I wanted to play with it a little bit more. My process was actually quite simple. It's just make big chickens or mom's path, and then basically just copy and paste it over to the little chickens, and then try to make a little bit of delay between each of them. So I really just make a spline path, and it assumes its children objects are the points of a spline, and so we copy all these children objects and make a copy for a next spline. So each of these chicken and chicks, each of them have their own spline. Now we can't, if we followed exactly the same spline, they would overlap, so it wouldn't be a nice follow in a row, which means that points have to be like delayed a little bit, or a little bit away from each other. So you use the original spline and just pull it a little bit. Very simple, but at the same time I had the hardest point with the last chick, because I made the spline a bit longer, trying to delay its follow. So after a few loops it becomes quite lost, and I feel sorry for it being away from the group. So you can see me playing with the last chick spline. So I had way more objects in my original, so I was just deleting them and then copying other spline over. And I think even in the other scene when I made it, I could realize the problem with the short spline that I made. And here as well, if you notice, it sticks out of the edge. So yes, I did have to make more points for the last chicken, and then it started becoming delayed. So I added a couple of more points and just cleaned up the spline. So that was a bit of a play. You can see me trying to run it, and if you watch it closely, the last chick, just the gap between the first and the last chick just starts increasing. It's not, I guess, that big, but you can see that this kind of becomes more and more delayed. If you notice now, it just becomes bigger, and the more times we circle around, I think it's just expanding, and I felt quite sorry about it. And I played a little bit with the lamps and shapes of these splines, and I couldn't completely get rid of the desync issue, but I think I minimized it to the point where it's just little bit less visible. So I started working on the brown chick, and then again repeating the same process where you have to make its own animator or idle, walk right, walk left. And by the way, I didn't mention I also have perch or sit down on some of my characters. When we finish the loop, what we did, we sometimes stop and sit down. Yeah, this was a later addition to the patrol script. I usually use a patrol script. There is few versions of the scripts that I have. For this I have patrol and wander, but again, being such a control freak, I find that patrol and spline made it much more predictable. And I basically just was redoing animations, and then again it's a new object, you have to make spline. I wanted to really show the entire process and of progress, or how I worked. Just feels like a grind, and it's just tiny steps of improvements. So this is what I made for the brown chicken. Actually, the brown chicken was made in a way where it walks down a spline and then sit downs, and sort of what I call my sit down animation or idle perch animation. But for some reason it was still like doing a lot of idle in each of the steps, more than I really wanted. If you notice, it peaks in each of these, but then it sit downs. So here we are, and then this is closely to finished, even though I was still clearly not happy that it's not playing everything what I wanted. And then I moved on to making sheep as well. I made these sheep, which basically supposed to be very cartoony, inspired by the long ago made drawing when I was still not quite sure I was making a game. I was kind of imagining very pixelated art stories, so I've drawn like almost the beats for this as a concept art, and it was taken for the drawing of that time. So was the drawing I made before, and I think I was still using either Fresco or Procreate, but I wasn't doing pixel art. But you can see the jelly bot already there in the concept art. It was, my character is already there and he's hugging a sheep that was very cartoonish with the big wobbly eyes and doesn't really look like a sheep. So I might regret the design later and might come back to redraw it, but I really liked referencing back to, you know, where the concept started from. So I'm basically just repeating the same process I did with the chicken, but now with the sheep. So creating an animator, and I don't have very well constructed file system, so you know, a lot of times it does get very confusing. I also only made a sheep only facing one direction. However, this time I can actually slice by cell or by grid, because that will be easier. A lot of times I slice by cell count because I forget which actual size I was using. And then I basically repeat the same process. But because I didn't make the both sides sprites flipped, in this method I'm actually just use transform inside the animator. So what I did is actually made state of walking right or left first and then just flipped it over. But why it took me nearly this entire session of working on my game took nearly 2 hours of a recording. I did cut short, and obviously this is a voiceover, but I was having a really bad ADHD day because I was literally just like flickering. I would be like, which side am I doing? Am I on the right or on the left? What am I doing now? What I'm doing now? And I was keep like being like zoned out almost. Is hard, and I don't know if that's why it took so long. But also when I was filming preview of the updates, I saw all these new mistakes, because if you notice the other map, you know, when I added a big rock blocking road as a part of my block, new more interesting blocks, and I came up with the idea to actually make a lot of pet rocks, and I was like, this is gonna be a pet rock. But the problem is entire then scene lost its flow because there were hidden secrets, and they like overlap. I don't like sprites overlapping, so there's a lot of overlap. I needed to place a couple more trees to completely block off that wave, and it doesn't, once the rock moves out, it doesn't look visually nice. So obviously I'm gonna try to restructure everything again. The point is that I'm being stuck in like scene 1 to 3 constantly, because I'm just like, oh, let's do something new, let's redo new mechanics, let's make new sprites, let's, you know, constantly just changing and adding. I think at this point I'm realizing that simplifying is actually a good approach, and I recently heard this in some game dev interview that's like, keep it simple, which I clearly didn't do because I feel like I want it all, and that's also partly ADHD as well, I think, because I constantly would be comparing. I was like, why do I not have this? Why do I not have that? Like now I'm actually looking more into the light objects and particle systems, but other people make them so beautiful regardless that we're using 2D art, which doesn't seem to work well for my artwork, which I feel like my artwork is not the worst out there, but you know, it doesn't work. Also, if you see next to the sheep, there is a dog that I made during Peachtober, and I kind of would like to redraw it too. The one of my friends said, oh, it's very cute, you know, it barks on its idle animation, but I kind of would like to remake it too, because that's what was drawn at the time that I was not letting myself to shade with like different opacity or different color. I found that shading with different opacity is really, really nice, and that's what I'm trying to go to right now. And the dog is literally like, I don't know, 3-4 colors, because I was feeling very pixel purist almost, but you know, let's be fair, my art is really not pixel pure. So that's why I thought, you know, I shouldn't really be too inflexible to that standard. Okay, you see, I added rotation in this one specifically just to flip the sprite because I didn't make the flipped sprites. So this is the example of a work around it. I constantly do it in very difficult ways, but this was really just make one side, literally copy paste all the keys into the other animation and just flip it with adding rotation, which sounds like it would be easy if I would just do it to everything instead of remaking entire animation. This is quite a boring part where I'm just working with the splines and you know, adding a few sheep, seeing how we move. So trying to make it smoother, but clearly it wasn't smooth, so I think I was playing a little bit more how to make them, you know, overlap nicely, move nicely. They kind of looked more like we're sliding, and I think I noticed that because one of the animations possibly was not looping correctly, if I was right. I forgot to mention, but if you look closely, there is also a little bit of swaying in the flowers because I also added a shader. It really didn't fit my artwork. Also, I don't know if you can see, but I was starting to add little colliders because if you see there is a treasure chest there on top, I kind of want player to be able to come here and also, you know, get to the treasure chest, play with sheep. So I really wanted to think about them all having dynamic sorting as well as colliders for when the player comes into here. So here are the animations, and I noticed that I selected colliders wrong. If you see that a collider for up sheep was put on the middle sheep and so and vice versa, because the collider remains stuck despite the animation moving. So I had to go around and fix that. Like I say, it was one of those brain foggy days where I was like, it's not working, things are not animating very nice. So my work process, from what I can tell, is put it on the screen, put it into the game and see if it works, go back, remake bunch of stuff. So like, it's not really smooth, it's a lot of trial and error, see what works, see what doesn't. It's not fast, it's very, very, very slow, not efficient even. So really with this, our little game dev jam session is complete. One of the separate occasions just the other day, I started making the inside of one of these houses in the farm area, and you see what I mean by playing with lights and playing with particle systems, and smoke is kind of going in the wrong direction and particle systems really don't agree with me, to the point where I'm just adapting the transform instead of playing with other modules in it, because it seems to play differently every time. So, you know, I have very little trust with it, as well as the light was not casting shadows in the same way, because if I put anything on a different layer of rendering, then everything else falls out and I can't make just as nice of a graphic. But I thought this scene was, you know, relatively cozy, and one of the reasons I'm showing it is that I did put a perching chicken in here on the little cat chair. So I thought it was kind of cozy. I literally did the scene just drawing each object one by one. So I would be like, oh, I think I want a chair, so I'll draw a chair. Oh, I think I want a fireplace, so I would draw a fireplace. So in this situation, I wasn't even making acid cheese. I was literally just like, this is what I'm gonna draw, and then immediately drop it in to see how it looks, which I feel like this this flow so far was almost the smoothest one, because you can immediately correct everything and think how can you make it nicer. I felt like this was very like Ghibli-esque room already for some reason, with that sort of cozy fireplace, cat chair and a chicken resting on it. So I just wanted to share, even though it's not finished, and I probably will show it another time, but this is a nice closing for this session. So that's about it. Tune in next time, and hopefully I have something more updated. Bye.